you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff Taylor, who can't say his own name, and with me as ever is the inevitable Ian Hardingham.
Hello everyone, it's thunder and lightning outside, and I'm hoping that today will be thunder and lightning inside as well.
Let's get out of this dungeon, in that case.
It's the top story.
Overland developer Adam Saltzman wrote an article for PC Gamer a week ago about the alternatives devs have to Steam Early Access. Do you think now people are taking the difference between their own betas and Steam Early Access more seriously?
Sounds like they are. So this is mainly revolving around the idea of a different storefront, I think, or publisher per se, that's just about alphas, etc. I kind of don't particularly see this taking off. But as we talked about at length last week, people are starting to wonder whether they want to be on the early access boat.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Itch are doing these things. So Itch are very kind of evangelistic in the game development community. They want to provide a real alternative to Steam for developers, particularly of smaller games. And I think that's a really good niche for them. I haven't seen anything that they've done that has made me want to put our stuff on there sort of as opposed to Steam or as opposed to using, for example, Humble's infrastructure, which is very good. But they're definitely doing good things and they're interesting, and I continue to follow what they're doing. I like talking to them. So this stuff I think is good. I think Steam Early Access, as we talked about before, it really comes with a load of baggage. It can be really difficult, particularly in terms of managing your messaging for how your game, when it's being released and so on. So I think being able to soft launch things effectively, which a release on anything else is, let's be honest, is good.
Yeah. You can do it through this, you can do it through your own website. One of the big advantages of using this is that it has sort of Steam-style automatic updates, which is pretty useful when you're doing quick updates, trying to get a lot of feedback from people, so that's really good. It's something I suppose I might take a look at. You can use the closed beta system on Steam for very small numbers of people, which can help as well. I said last time that I was going to reflect on what's going on with early access, and I haven't really got anywhere with my reflection yet. The issues are still very complicated. The extent to which maybe your product becomes boring in early access, the issue of the Steam reviews, which I'm still a little bit unsure of. It's still something that I don't feel I've got a complete handle on where we're going.
Yeah. No, it is difficult. I mean, we've always done our own beta first, and I think, last week's topic caused us to sort of reflect on that again. And there are some real advantages to that. Just having something that's completely under your control. And I know patching and stuff is really hard, and certainly a lot of smaller devs won't be able to do that without an external system. So maybe this Itch thing is good if you're in that situation. It's just... Also, I think, we do this and other people do this. Releasing something early is very much a psychological thing as well as a pragmatic and a marketing thing. There's something about that which is important psychologically.
Absolutely. It really, it's really a good process to go through. It will tend, I think, to actually improve the speed with which you finish your game, as long as you don't get too caught up in what happens around early access launch. I think one of the most difficult things is trying to work out what feedback you get at early access launch you have to take seriously. At what point does a deafening lack of interest in your game cause you to have serious concerns about going forward or changing what you're doing? That can be very disruptive, but any problems that are pointed out at the early access launch are very likely going to happen at your real launch. So it's kind of in some ways a case of ripping the plaster off and finding out early enough that you might be able to do something meaningful about it, the significant problems that you might come across.
The other thing we've talked about before is that prior to this, you can do as much kind of closed beta as you want. You can do all sorts of things like this, but until someone's paid for your game, they're never going to have the same relationship to it. They're never going to have the same investment in it. Just really well-known psychological thing. Even with a very small, sort of trivially small amount of money associated with something, someone feels a particular ownership and they feel, that they have rights to certain things. And that feeling times a million is what customers will feel at your launch. So certainly for newer devs, I think for newer devs, I'd say always do your own beta if you can.
Sure, I think that's relatively sensible. I think that, I think we will look at what we do and see how it turns out. I think early access on Steam has more problems when compared to stuff on your own website than I originally thought about. Now, we did pretty well with both Frozen Synapse and Frozen Cortex's launch on our own websites, the original beta. And yep. I think because of that, I didn't view early access as such a big difference. But now in this day and age, direct sales have gone down a lot. You tend to expect to do less well from your own website. And that kind of underlines some of the negatives that you get from Steam. I want to be more eloquent about this, but I still haven't worked out what I think about pre-release games today.
I think it's evolving as well. It's one of the reasons it's hard to nail down. I think people's relationship to early access games has still really changed a lot. The way the press talk about them has changed a lot. So it's difficult to keep tabs on, especially when you're in the middle of making a game. That's one of the things that we experience a lot and other devs experience, is that these landscapes change, and people who are buying games, who are players of games, are much more in touch with this often than devs are, I think.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
How should developers respond to criticism? Jeff Vogel shared his experiences of negative criticism and abuse and had some advice for other indies. What did you make of this?
Yeah, this was fine. Always enjoy Mr. Vogel's writing. I do think that dealing with negative feedback is really one of the hardest things about being a developer, being any kind of artist out there. And I kind of am disappointed in myself to find that I just think the answer is don't read the comments. I think that it's really important to stay on track with the kind of thing that you believe you're making. I think it's important to make something that's authentic to yourself. And I think that humans are just unable to process negative feedback. I mean, it's the same old story. If you have 1,000 positive feedback comments and one really negative one, you're just going to think about the negative one all day. And that's just not healthy to a creator, especially not when the signal to noise ratio is terrible on the kind of feedback that you get from people.
Yeah.
And divining the right stuff to do with it is really, really hard. I've talked about on a previous podcast the idea of doing a feedback swap with another developer where they read your negative feedback and you read theirs, and you both try and get it in a good situation for each other to take in, because I think just reading this stuff raw is bad for you.
Yeah, this post was interesting because it's kind of verging on just telling everyone to shut up. Like, it's clear that that's what he really wants to say. And he's kind of examining that and hedging a bit through the post. And that's interesting. I've seen this from older developers and developers who have, released a lot of games, that they kind of feel like they've been getting this abuse for years, and that newer devs coming in are overreacting to it and being too soft, basically, is the undercurrent of this. And to me, that reflects quite an interesting culture clash in game development. I think as game development has become more open and accessible, so too have the floodgates to the idiots who will say horrible things to you all the time. And different people are going to have different reactions to that. So while I have some sympathy for this kind of view, I think maybe I want to say this is a bit of an archaic view of this stuff.
Fair enough. Don't disagree. I mean, certainly with the social medias, people have a lot more ways in which they can talk about you and your game, and also a lot more moods in which they might do that. In the olden days, it just used to be your forums, and only a certain kind of person goes on the forums to start with, and it tends to be a more narrow set of different kinds of things they can write, whereas you can get a lot of very strange things happening on Twitter and Facebook, etc. So, is it harder now? I think you probably need to be more aware of it now. I think it was a lot easier to just not look at your forums in the olden days than it is now to stay off social media if people are starting to talk about your thing on Twitter a lot and that's getting you down. I think that's true. I mean, I know what you mean. I mean, Vogel does tend to have this kind of slightly I've been there, I've done this, and if you can't cope with it, just get out the kitchen vibe.
Yes.
And I think he's got a very singular story. I mean, he's basically made some very niche games that he's managed to also make profitable. And that's actually, it's a different story to a lot of people. And I think the lessons he's learnt are often not applicable to the rest of us. And I feel sometimes the same way about Cliffsky, although Cliff has a lot more mainstream stuff that he does and a lot more advice that's just genuinely useful. Every so often, the way that he feels about games development comes out in stuff he tells people, and sometimes I think that's not always helpful. So yeah, I guess old men making games and shouting about it isn't always the best thing.
Yeah, and it is difficult to know which components of your experience are generally useful and which are specific to you. Certainly, with a lot of developers, particularly developers who've only had one successful game or have just had their first game and that was successful, listening to them talk about things is often bewildering, and rightly so, because a lot of that isn't going to be generalizable. With this stuff, I mean, I definitely sympathize with what he's saying. I think you have to trace a line. It is extremely hard in modern culture to know when someone is being unreasonable about some input that they've got and when you should just sympathize with them. That is kind of surely one of the biggest debates of our time. And I feel like that's being really reflected in how people look at game development. I mean, so the two approaches to this are kind of, you need to suck it up and ignore it, or we need to work together to proactively change the environment so it doesn't happen. And that is not something that he mentioned, and yet that would be a lot of people's first line approach to this, I think.
Yeah, I never even think about how to change the environment. I just sort of take the internet cesspool as a given and just try and work my own way around it. That's how I tend to deal with a lot of these different things. I just sort of take the environment as a static thing and work out how I can best deal with it. I usually leave it to other people to be the activists in change. People are they're gonna play games and they're gonna watch TV and they're gonna listen to music and they're gonna have emotions about it. And sometimes that emotion is gonna be anger. And while I think people should be much better trained not to really lose their temper online, I do think, though, you're not gonna stop people saying negative things. I want to say horrible things about SteamWorld Heist. I'm not going to say anything specific beyond that, online or anywhere. I want to say terrible things about it. And I'm a pretty, I'm not a massive internet troll, but it's something that rubbed me up massively badly. And I don't think you can legislate against that, against people having a really honest reaction to something. The thing you've got to legislate against is the fact that people can't deal with negative feedback. I mean, and I don't mean specific people, I mean everyone. And I think that a lot of this is about protecting yourself. And I think you alluded to it a bit. There is a lot of stuff going on right now about how acceptable that a particular idea of having to protect yourself in these situations, how acceptable that is. But I think when you're making a product, and we're not talking about racism or sexism, we're not talking about anything like that, we're talking about someone being negative about a thing that you made, I think that you do have to protect yourself in that, and it is more on you than them, to be totally honest. And I think finding a way of having a social media presence that doesn't make you want to kill yourself is what you need to do.
Yeah, I think there's a really meaningful distinction there, as you say, when it's focused on your actual work. If someone hates you because of who you are, then that's different, and that is something that needs to be eliminated, or attempt to eliminate from discussion as much as you can. Whereas, yes, people do have to be free to say bad things about your work, unconsidered things about your work, and you have to be able to ignore those things. I mean, it's just a skill, I think, in terms of it's something that you can learn. Different people have different aptitudes at it naturally. And it's something that you do have to work on with yourself and use systems that you can to do it as best you can. I really think that's all there is to it. But,
I think you can, a couple of pieces of advice that I want to give myself as much as anyone else. If you are really proud of your own work, that makes this a lot easier. And I think one of the ways to make that more likely is, I really still don't think you should spend a lot of time in this business making something for other people. I think that you often get into trouble by saying, this is what I think people like, this is what I think people will like. when you are making a high level design decision or a project management decision based on that, I think it can often go awry, and that's the decisions that hurt most when you're wrong. Because you didn't do that thing for you as the creator. You did that because you thought it was a way to make your product be liked more, to be more successful, to be more popular. And I personally think that that gets you into trouble more often than not. It's obviously, if the thing that you want to make is completely uncommercial, completely impossible for anyone else to get on board with, then that's problematic, but that may mean that you're just not going to ever get there at all. If you make something that you really, really value, and you've actually done the work before a launch to find out what you've got wrong, if you talk to people who you can actually cope with negative feedback from, and you find out what they don't like, and you make sure that you have given them permission to be genuinely negative, then you'll start to get a lot more confidence that what you've made is actually good, and the negative stuff that you're getting is just from people who would never have liked your game to start with. There are lots and lots of people who just don't like Frozen Synapse. That doesn't bother me anymore, because I'm pretty sure that Frozen Synapse is really good for a lot of people. So that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's one of those... I think that's generally true. I think there are people who are really good at making things for people who aren't them. And I find those kind of creators really fascinating, and there aren't many of them in indie game development at all. I think
I definitely agree with that. I think that you should be... I think you should do that if you're really good at that, and there are people who are good at that. I definitely agree with that.
I would like to hear more from those people. I mean, there is this maxim that goes around of like, oh, you shouldn't design for yourself, you should design for your audience. And like you, I've seen the most practical realization from that is actually where people do overlap with their audience. And it might be for some weird reason that they do, but they're simultaneously making actually something that they really like. So I'm still not really clear on who those people are and what their personalities are like. But there's a lot of evidence out there in game development that they exist, because people are able to design really successfully, games for people who aren't them, for demographics who aren't them. So it would be interesting to hear more from those people, but maybe they're all stuck inside big companies.
Yeah, and I think that's getting away a little bit from this point, but I do totally agree with that. We've often talked about the idea of people making cynical clones of games, and the real pitfalls that you get into. I think there's more and more sort of... it's not cloning that I'm talking about. In indie games, there's a lot of sort of, let's take 3 different things that should be successful and put them together. And you're trying to make what I think kind of ends up being a fairly cynical product, where you say we're going to have the world building from Minecraft and the aesthetics from Borderlands and the violence from something else, and you put it together, and I think a lot of times it doesn't work because it's being done by people who don't have a lot of experience making for want of a better word, a cynical product like that. And I don't know how we got here exactly, but that's something that I think about a lot.
From criticism, interestingly. Games are getting more and more difficult to preserve. Making sure that games can be played indefinitely is an unsolved problem that is only going to get harder now that they often rely on network services to function. Do you think there's any way that heavily online games can be preserved?
Not in general, no. I don't think that there's any solution to this except on a case-by-case basis. I think that you can make League of Legends work in perpetuity if you try hard enough. If you get one of those old hacked EverQuest servers, you could do that. I can't think of any way. You can't just take a snapshot of the developer's server architecture and keep that. And you know what it's like being a developer. It's really hard to ever think about that while you're making games. And it causes such a problem with updating when you're trying to keep some version in perpetuity. I think it's basically a lost cause.
And that's really interesting, because that means that these games join a category of cultural thing that I think is probably just only performance in the past. I think performances are the only things that are fundamentally impossible to preserve.
Right. I think the interesting thing here is it's actually more the server features single player than multiplayer. I think everyone kind of understood this for multiplayer to a certain extent. And it's kind of like, if the servers are turned off, then you can't play multiplayer. But I'm thinking about the single player aspect of this. Stuff like Dark Souls and Metal Gear Solid 5 have really significant kind of weird networked adjuncts to their single player that they're thoroughly sort of designed around to a certain extent. And, with both those games, you can play them offline, and that's a real experience. But as this article is suggesting, it may be in 10 years that the lines are blurred to such an extent that even single player games, sort of in general, are no longer preservable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think about what the impact will be on future generations where people can't do these things. I mean, it's got to really suck. Like, if you're designing a game that has some collaborative single player element like that, like a Dark Souls thing, or if you're designing a multiplayer game or an MMO, not being able to play like the classic of the genre. Maybe you were sort of too young when it came out. You can't go and play WoW or something. That's absolutely crazy. You'd have to watch videos of it and read about it. But as a designer, that would be awful.
Yeah, that would be really weird. Yeah, you'd have to be watching videos of old Shakespeare performances or something, right? Like to try and find out what the 1972 enactment of X was like, and that's really legendary. I mean, I don't know if it's like wine. Probably not very much like wine. Yeah, I think it's very strange. I mean, I don't feel too nervous about it right now because we're keeping our servers alive, and all of our games so far have had really good, significant single-player stuff, have hot seat, so it's not like the work is completely disappearing. Yeah. But, I guess there's just absolutely nothing you can do about it, so it's not worth worrying about.
Fair enough. As part of the recruitment process, Riot now ask for a prospective employee's LOL username. Apparently, the company searches chat logs and match history for evidence of abuse and inverted commas toxicity, as they believe it to be a reliable indicator of the workplace performance. There's also some suggestion recently that they did this for currently employed people at their company. They went and looked at their behavior in League of Legends. What do you think about this?
I think this is pretty smelly. So, I mean, the first thing that struck me while reading the articles about this is actually not a surprising thing, but it did strike me that everyone who works at Riot has to be like a proper League of Legends player, which I find just on its own quite disturbing, even though it also makes complete sense. If you're Riot or you're fans of League of Legends, you would want everyone working there. I mean, I presume they don't put it down to the cleaning staff or whatever, but anyone working in any kind of role there to be a proper fan of the game and to understand what's going on. But, in terms of sort of workplace pressures, that immediately sounds problematic to me. And now, I mean, I would never have done this as an owner of a company. I think this is so problematic to start, looking at how your employees are behaving in League of Legends and then trying to link it to having problems with those employees in the workplace. That's just one of the most problematic areas I can possibly imagine, really, within normal space, and I would just not want to get anywhere near it.
I think there was some suggestion as well that this is illegal, which, you would kind of hope it was. Yeah, I really hate this. I think it's absolutely terrible. People do all kinds of things in online games. It's easy to say something you regret in an online game. Definitely, almost more than in any other environment. And sure, I mean, I don't think you'd want to employ like a notorious League of Legends troll or someone like that. I think that could be quite bad. I feel like the community would probably sort that one out for you at some point. I feel like you should have standards once someone is employed for how they behave in the game. I think that makes a lot of sense. Once you're a Riot employee, you should not go on and start shit-talking people in the game. That's bad, obviously, and that's fine. That's within known parameters. But this idea of, like, stuff you did in the past or stuff you did when you didn't know they were watching, unbelievably terrible. It violates trust to such a great extent.
Yeah, doesn't it? And even if there is a correlation, I mean, we could all agree on a very sort of very abstract level that you could imagine there was a correlation between you causing problems at work and being like a really badly behaved League of Legends player. Even if it's true, I just can't imagine anyone not finding it incredibly offensive that you use that method to try and find out about one of your employees.
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
It's
yeah.
worse than trolling their Facebook page, I think.
Right. Yes, this correlation thing is totally spurious because, yes, I'm sure if I made all of our employees wear a GoPro on their head every hour of every day, that would help me identify potential it's just nonsense. It doesn't matter. It's the method is immoral.
Yeah, I'm glad you're strong on this because I basically feel exactly the same. I think the method is possibly is immoral, and I have to say I'm not going to go and work at Riot now, and that's not some sort of reaction to this, like overreaction. If I were in the job marketplace, this would make me think twice about going to work at Riot. I mean, both aspects actually. The fact that I have to be a League of Legends player. I mean, is that is there anything weird about that? I mean. Of course, they want everyone to be fans of their game, but it seems there's something there that I find difficult as well.
If you work in finance, then I guess probably not. It probably doesn't make any sense. I think if you work on anything to do with the game, then yeah, I think it makes sense that you're an active player. I mean, it's kind of a service now. It's almost like working at Facebook and not using Facebook. It's at that level. So I kind of think that's okay as long as they expect you to be good.
I hope you're allowed to play at work because
right, yes.
I mean, otherwise they should pay you for playing at home, idiots.
I don't think anyone will be playing at work after this, but. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, I think there's a worrying that could lead to a lot of sort of almost cult-like employment stuff. It would be good to employ people who hate League of Legends
exactly.
and would never play it as well. So I hope they
challenge
do that.
their beliefs.
Yeah, no, you definitely need that. You need some dissonant opinions. So I think that's the main problem with that idea. Yeah,
there's a double thumbs down from us about this.
I think it's good they've been called out on this. They do. The upside of this stuff is that they just try stuff. They do try things, Riot, and this is a bold thing to try. However, I think it's way over the line. They should stop. There you go. More LoL news now, as changes to the match queue system have proven to be extremely unpopular with all players, from casuals to pros. Despite highly vocal dissatisfaction from their players, Riot have made no indication of backing down. This is the dynamic queue issue. What do you think about this?
Yeah, back into the realm of stuff that we're definitely qualified to talk about. This is just standard game development nonsense and not like wider social issues. This is pretty interesting. I'm going to try and explain to the listeners what it changed from and to as I understand it. So a queue, I have a feeling we're going to be using this word a lot in the next segment. A queue is basically just you are saying you want to play League of Legends, so you join the queue to play. In the olden days, you had two different kinds of queue. One which was sort of like a you help me if I'm wrong about this, a kind of a solo unranked queue, and then the other one was sort of a team-based rank queue. Is that right?
I'm not sure that solo queue is unranked.
Yeah, maybe you're right about that. So basically, they made a hard division between playing on your own and being pushed together with other people for your team.
Yeah.
Because League of Legends is a 5-on-5 game, and teamed one. So they, at some point in the last 6 months, they decided to get rid of this and have one queue which tried to get the best of both worlds, and it doesn't appear to have worked. People are very angry about it. The top level pros are like sorting out their own matches now, and Riot have refused to change it. I'm not surprised this hasn't worked. I don't actually really understand what the benefit of this is. They have enough players. They can cope with having two queues. To me, playing in inverted commas solo, i.e. not as part of a bunch of people that you already know, would be a very different experience. It makes sense to me sort of aesthetically that these two things would be divided. Where are you on this?
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a good enough grasp on the technical stuff here. Like, there must be a reason that they really wanted to change this. This normally...
They don't seem to have communicated that very well.
No, this normally seems to be about queuing times, because I know that used to be really bad. The article on PC Gamer makes the point that queuing times are still bad with dynamic queue, top pros having to wait for hours to get a match and so on. That's fairly common with extremely high-level players in everything. I've seen a lot of StarCraft players' streams having to wait for ages to get matches when they're doing really, really well, which is fine. So... I'm
just reading a bit further than this. It's possible that what this is trying to do, it may have been that there just weren't enough people playing on the team queue.
Right.
So that became a bit like way too long times, and people were just never getting games. And this is a desire to fix that. They seem to make, maybe what is being implied here is that if you wanted to play team and you hadn't organised a team versus team match specifically, that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Like, you just weren't sort of basically unable to get that done.
Okay. Also, I do know from my little tiny tangential bit of LoL awareness that solo queue was like a kind of running joke of how bad it was. You know, people would just call it like salt queue or something. You know, just like they hated it. So it might be an overreaction to dislike this. I mean, a lot of pros have written kind of long things about it. It's matchmaking and queuing and so on. It just never seems to work. Like, most games that have a lot of players seem to have loads of problem with matchmaking, and I'm wondering if that's because players want very different things from it.
Well, it's a very difficult problem because I think these companies tend to think that being matched against someone of your skill level is very important. I mean, I'm not saying that they're wrong about that. I think a lot of people say it's important. But when you have, that's quite a specific requirement. And even if you've got like 50,000 people playing at any one time, you can start to see problems with that. Having to even that out. I think that's I think it used to work well enough in games which had proper server browsers, where you just had to learn how to use a server browser. And then you had to make the decision, like, am I happy to play on this server that doesn't have as many people on? Or am I happy to deal with worse ping? Or am I going to be happy to wait? And then you had full control over that, and that worked itself out. I was always pretty dubious of going to this completely automated system, and I think it just in general isn't working particularly well. I mean, as a 5-on-5, like hardcore 5-on-5 game, a server browser probably isn't going to work. And I'm sure they know far more than I do about the problems at hand, so I'm not even sure I can really suggest very much. I wonder why it's so bad for people to be matched to people of two different skill levels. I wonder if it's because Riot know that they can't give you enough reward if you're beating someone much worse than you. So you have this annoying thing where it's still quite fun, but it's not as fun, but you don't get a proper reward, so it feels like you're wasting your time.
So are you talking about being on the same team with someone who's worse than you, or against someone who's worse than you?
No, against someone worse
Well, it's
than
just
you,
boring.
which I understand is also a different problem.
Basically, if you play a lot of a multiplayer game, what you want is you want to beat players who seem competent so that you feel good about yourself. You want a challenge that you can meet from players who are better than you. And then occasionally you want to see someone who's amazing, and occasionally you want to destroy someone who's really terrible. But really, really occasionally. Those are all the things.
So what I think that I would do is that I would say there were 6 skill levels, close to the leagues of Diamond, Gold, whatever. I think I'd just let you choose which one to play in. On any given night, because you won't keep playing in Diamond if you're terrible and you're getting very negative feedback from people and they start banning you. You just won't. You're not going to have like someone who just plays in Diamond every single day, even though he's only just started playing the game. But without that, I think in some ways it's my decision. If I'm on the borderline between Gold and Silver, some days I'm going to want an easier match. I'll go to Silver. Sometimes I have a lot of mental energy. I want to challenge myself. I'll go to Gold. That should be my decision.
I would like to have more decision involved with matchmaking. I think that system sounds like too freeform to me. I think you could end up with like a load of weird stuff. Also, the problem with stuff like this is it really breaks progression mechanics, secondary progression mechanics. So you get a lot of high-level players farming whatever by beating noobs. So you'd break, the low leagues would get a bit polluted with higher level players doing that stuff if you have one of those systems as well. So that's something that you'd need to be careful of. Maybe it could take...
Yeah, I mean, you can mitigate that with rewards, but sure, I do understand that.
I think maybe if you expressed a preference, if you said, I want an easy match this time, and it found you one, and that was okay, and then maybe you can't keep doing that, you can do it once or whatever. Maybe you just mitigate that. But yes, fundamentally what you're saying is you should let the player choose the kind of experience they're going to have, and I would really, really like that. All the multiplayer games I play, I would really like that. Also, tanking is really stupid. Like, if I go back, I haven't played Smash for like 6 months now. If I go back and play now, I will have to lose like 10 games in a row in order to get near my skill level. And I don't want to do that. That's stupid. I'd much rather just say, hey, I'm bad again now. Put me back down here and I'll start again. So choice is good.
Yeah, this really irritates the hell out of me in the car that I've got. It's a very nice car, it's a very old car, but it's an Audi, and it tries to automate everything. It has 2 different automated windscreen wiper settings, and they both just don't work. Yeah. It has this thing where it tells me when I put my water on the passenger side seat, it starts bleeping because it thinks there's a person sitting there who doesn't have their seatbelt on. And it does so many of these things, and it drives me absolutely crazy because nothing winds me up more. And this is one of the reasons I'm not like an Apple device fan. Nothing winds me up more than automation that doesn't work well. Yes. And I think that this server browser stuff, or this lack of server browser stuff, is exactly that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's a lot to be said for good automation there. I mean, having played Overwatch a bit now, the matchmaking that seems good, and I have no idea what it's doing. It's quite nice that I don't know what it's doing. Different things happen.
Is it 2 teams in Overwatch?
Yes.
And is it like a hardcore player numbers on each side, or
as in it's the same number of players on each side?
Does it have to be 5v5?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it has the same problems as League of Legends. I mean, that's a really difficult thing to do. Yeah.
And you can have a party of any size as well.
Right.
Up to 5. It's interesting. So because so much is about how you approach the game. Like, it's going to be really different for different people. If I really wanted to improve at Overwatch, God knows what I'd do. I mean, you'd probably have to play with a consistent team. It's a huge mess, even from like deciding what you want to do as a player. So it must be a mess for developers.
Yeah.
PC Gamer have created a list of lessons that a potential new Quake game could learn from the latest Doom game. Chief among these are expanding the new snap map system to something more like full modding and maintaining the same light touch with the story. It's always really interesting to see what journalists think are really important to a game. They often have a perspective that's radically different from developers. Do you think that these are valid lessons?
I think these aren't necessarily the lessons that I'm getting from Doom. I still haven't played Doom because I haven't had any time. I think I want to start with the snap map thing, actually, or whatever it's called. Yeah, snap map. Sounds like this has had a bit of a lukewarm reception. Yes. I'm not terribly surprised. I wouldn't say... You can challenge me on this a bit. I would say that the most successful UGC stuff is where you give people full power, but for whatever reason that ends up being easy to use. So you have as much power as you want in Minecraft, for instance. Minecraft just happens to be an extremely easy game to make levels for, you know? And I think that it doesn't really... I was not at all surprised that SnapMap didn't work out, because I think that when you give people this sort of nodified version of creation tools, that just ends up not being a happy medium for them. So what do you think about that?
A lot of the issue with mod stuff is about the potential to do anything you want. And I think a lot of people get attracted to it for that reason. So even if they never use them, I think like a very large number of people who are interested in mod support like the idea that they can do anything. And then a few people will use that and produce amazing mods. I mean, this thing about Doom's, like, I think modding in Doom was really important at this very specific point in time. I'm not really sure about this, like, oh, mods keep Doom alive today. And I actually think that's nonsense. I think Doom would be alive today without any mods, actually, because it's Doom. So I just don't buy that as an ongoing factor in its popularity.
Well, I think that, for me, I think it's sort of halfway between those two things. I think that the fact it can be alive, and that people can keep sort of doing certain things to it, means that being a sort of a Doom 1 fan is a lot richer of an experience.
Sure. Yeah, I get
like if
that.
You're, you know, so I think that's kind of important. You know, I've got such an aesthetic problem with making levels for something where I just can't make geometry that fits in with what this stuff looks like because I don't have time to make a 1,000,000 polygon table. That so undermines modern level editing for me. But the problem is not that they need to make a version of SnapMap. The problem is that I just want to mod things where the stuff is within my grasp as a creator. So I don't find the idea of modding Doom, the new Doom, which still to me feels like a sort of a AAA, very shiny thing, and not kind of a sort of a latent tool set like a lot of those old games did. That's just not very attractive to me. So, do I want the new Quake to feel like Quake 1 did, where everything feels like it's on the table, it's this incredible new technology, but it's also accessible to creators? Yeah, of course I do, but that's not what it's going to feel like.
Also, I mean, mods are still this really confused thing. Obviously, the paid Steam mod thing, which I'm so disappointed didn't happen. That was going to be one of the things I think might have made me interested in mods. That didn't happen. And now you've got stuff like console platform holders saying that you're going to have mod support in stuff like Skyrim on the consoles, which I just don't even know how that's going to work. Like, that was sort of announced recently. You're going to have a mod browser and you're going to be able to put mods on your console. It just seems like complete insanity to me. So I don't think, like, mods are still so in flux to me that I don't think you can emphatically say, that's a lesson that you should learn. Should we move on to other lessons?
Yeah, I want to hit on the multiplayer next. So new Doom's multiplayer wasn't received particularly well, and it was created by an outside company, and ID themselves, or id, or whatever, are taking it back on themselves because Doom was a massive success and they have enough money to spend some money beefing up the multiplayer. Now, it's not at all unusual for this to happen, for an outside development team to work on the multiplayer. That's happened a lot of times in the last 15 years. And I'm tempted to say that it never makes something really great. And I actually kind of think this is, I'll make a pretty weird analogy now. This is a bit of analogous to me to the Kickstarter thing. What you really want is a game to be the most amazing thing of all time. And what you really want is for the multiplayer to be amazing. And I think that those older games that had incredible single player and multiplayer, and even being egotistical, you go back to Frozen Synapse, I think, which is a game that has pretty good single player and multiplayer. You need the same people working on both. You need to have the people who really understand what your mechanics are doing working on both. And you need to have all of that stuff for it to be great. So I never want to hear that a game that I'm excited about has a multiplayer being made by a different company. I think it puts just to get back to that stupid Kickstarter point and actually make that point, I think it puts a cap on how good it can be. I think you're going to get so many kind of like 82% good multiplayers, which for multiplayer is almost death because people are only playing the best multiplayer games. And often that's how I feel about Kickstarter. So I would sincerely hope that it would do the Quake multiplayer in-house.
Yeah, I just don't feel qualified on this. I felt like if I said that on Twitter, what you just said, people would tweet me like a million examples of weird FPSs that had great multiplayer from an external team from the last 10 years that I've never heard of. So
definitely possible.
That's kind of my feeling. That, like, I'm sure...
Although I'd expect you to have majority people agreeing with that statement on Twitter, to be honest. I don't think that's a very controversial thing to say.
I'm going to try that then.
Oh, no. Live tweet.
I mean, I get where you're coming from. I think homogeneity with the single player is there is something about that which is attractive. That's kind of as far as I'll go on this. And this sort of it's really interesting that dual single player multiplayer has come back as a thing now. Everything just cycles round. It's so funny that we're talking about Quake, the original game that dropped single player in favor of multiplayer only releases, and then now that this is what they're saying Quake needs to do, it needs to have both modes. The year of 2016, the year of Luigi. It's not the year of Luigi anymore, is it? It just seems odd to me. Yes. Other aspects of this, or do you think we're done here?
The only other thing that I found interesting here, the core aspect of Doom is its speed.
Yes.
And people want to tell Quake, don't be afraid to be super fast.
Yes.
Go away from the, I don't know what you call it, naturalistic modern warfare stuff. Just be really fast and arcade-like. And I'm certainly on board with that.
Yeah. No, I really do like that, and that is a good lesson. I'm interested in this new wave of FPSs. Yeah, I haven't played much Doom, mostly because Overwatch arrived and sort of took over the interests of my friends who actually play games completely. So I sort of ended up getting sucked into that when I'd started playing Doom. And the speed and the arcadiness of it were definitely the most attractive aspect. So yes, more in this evolution of the FPS is good.
Yes.
EA launched a new indie developer program during the E3 conference this year. It's called EA Originals, and according to the company, it will be dedicated to finding small companies and providing funding and support in order to help them create, quote, unique, gorgeous, innovative, and memorable games. The first game they're publishing is called Fae, or Fe. I'm going to say Fae because I doubt that a game's been released called Fae. Fe. The Swedish studio is called Zoink. It is a game about a relationship with nature. What do you think about this trend of big publishers doing indie publishing?
I mean, I just want to know how big the teams they're considering are. I'm afraid I don't know how big the team for this game, whose name we can't pronounce, is. If it's like 15 or 20 people, then I'm not sure how this is sort of all that different to what they were doing before. When they've gone out and sort of tried to sign sort of slightly artier games. I think it's good if the big guys are... you know what, I don't even think it's particularly good. I don't know what's going to come out of this. I think this is going to basically push existing small to mid-sized studios to just do more indie stuff. So like companies that already exist, that have quite a high burn rate, are going to say, oh, look, we can now... EA's possibly going to publish us and we can make something that's a bit more of our passion project. I don't think they're going to be going around Rezzed looking for things to publish. That's just my take on it. I could be wrong.
I really disagree with that. Zoink, it turns out, actually had the booth next to us at PAX East, which is amazing. And they are quite a small team. I think there's about 10 of them.
Okay.
So kind of in line with what you're saying. But I'm not getting the same thing as you from this at all. Like, I think they are going to be going around Rezzed trying to find things to publish. I think that's exactly what they're doing. And also, this kind of game, this kind of team are the kind of teams who would be there. So yes, they're not going for the level of people who wouldn't be at shows like that, the very, the single person developers particularly, but they are probably aiming just above that. And it's just a trend, Square Enix are doing this as well. We've seen other publishers attempt to kind of get in on this. A lot of small and mid-tier publishers arriving. It just seems like an entire area. All of this makes me really concerned about trying to start a business publishing indie games.
Sure. I think that is hard. I think you have to find enough games to publish is very difficult right now. I mean, you're the one who's been looking around for stuff,
yeah,
and we would have a pretty high quality bar, and it's hard to find that stuff. I think that I'd like to know how many people EA are going to sign. I mean, for me, the right move for them is to do a massive quantity play.
Right.
They should be publishing 40 different things because they can afford to do that.
Yes. And
if 2 of them take off, then it'll be a win.
Yeah.
That's what they should be doing, in my opinion. I think we'll see what they actually do. If you're a developer, how do you capitalize on this? Well, it's not as easy as it was 2 years ago when there was a bit more of a rush on the 1 or 2 people studios. People like who was Mastertronic, for instance. They were a company, unfortunately now have gone bust, who are looking around for really small developers and publishing them. And I think that was a good time to just pitch. I don't think it's quite as good a time to pitch if you're a 1 or 2 man team as it was back then. I don't know if you want to create a 10-man team with the absolute intention of getting published by EA.
Yeah.
That might be a good call if you're languishing in a big AAA house and you want to go out on your own and you haven't had the opportunity before. If you've got some great artists, make a great pitch and pitch it to EA, and you might find that's your opportunity.
This creates a really weird ecosystem where there are going to be these companies now doing significant marketing spends on titles with smaller dev budgets, and it's going to make it harder for titles with smaller dev budgets that don't have significant marketing spends to compete as well. So I feel like there's a negative for indies implicit in this, as well as for people like us who are looking at publishing things. It just feels like a big encroachment by a lot of companies into an area which hitherto was being ignored by them.
I think you're right. I think this is part of the larger Game of Thrones style winter is coming of the saturation of the indie games market. I agree with that. To insert a bit of positivity, though, we have definitely seen over the last couple of years indie games get a bit more conservative, I would say. And I think that these publishers are not going to be able to avoid being relatively conservative with the games that they publish. They're just not going to be able to avoid it. So I still think that there's space to make something really interesting and new. And that sort of space is continuing to kind of open up a little bit. We've talked about this in the past a lot of times. What we're seeing now is, or certainly what we're seeing over the last 18 months, is a lot of games that had really great concepts, but weren't executed all that well, or executed in kind of a boring way.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a change. I think that the quality bar of everything coming out has definitely increased.
Yes.
But I still think that there's space there. And yeah, it's incredibly hard and massively daunting. On the other hand, if you get the right thing and it's good enough and you work on it, it can be all right. So I don't know. Run for the hills. Winter is coming.
All maps and game modes for Titanfall 2 will be available for free to all players. The original game started out with paid map packs, but made them all free after a year. Is this a significant change?
Yes, I want to talk about this. This is about splitting the community. Basically, Titanfall did, very underwhelmingly for their expectations.
Yep.
It did well enough for them to be doing a sequel. But I feel relatively confident that it was a disappointment to the guys who were hoping it would be the next Modern Warfare. Do you want to interject and disagree with that?
Sure. No, I think they really had very high expectations for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that what's happened with this DLC for the first one is some reflection of that. They found that if you charge for DLC, you're obviously splitting the communities, and if you're not doing incredibly well, that often means that you're just not getting enough people in any one area able to play the game. It also, it at some point starts to antagonize your loyal people. I think it is true to say that people who are really into a game, like Titanfall or Destiny, get very upset when they feel they're overcharged in certain circumstances. So that's something they've got to pay attention to. I think this is a really interesting topic. I wonder if we're going to see other games do this. I mean, Modern Warfare probably doesn't have to do this. It's so popular. But I kind of like seeing this bouncing, zigzagging approach to how you deal with after-sales support, how much money you try and get out of people. It's really banging back and forth in these big multiplayer games.
Yeah, I mean, maps. Can you think of a good example of where paid maps have worked in an online shooter? Because I can't.
I mean, the only one I can imagine worked was Modern Warfare.
Did they have paid
and
maps?
I think, yeah, they
okay.
did, and they charged a stupid amount for them as well. But I mean, I'm sure it worked in terms of making a lot of money, but I certainly think it probably antagonized the user base, and I don't see them. Let's put it this way: I don't see them expanding that program right now.
I can't. Maybe. I'd need to look into the Modern Warfare thing more. I mean. Yeah, I just don't know what's going on there. It just seems like, to me, an absolutely dreadful thing to charge money for. Like, it just doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Of course, that's going to be massively annoying and really, literally divide your community in the most direct way you possibly can. And when you have, the game's predicated on maintaining a large number of basically simultaneous users, then you have to start thinking about things like that a lot. So, and there's plenty of examples of games where you don't have to do that. Yeah, it just seems baffling to me that they would even try that in the first place.
Yeah, sell hats and skins. Don't sell maps.
Yeah, exactly. These games, you want to make places that people want to spend their time. You're making almost a social network now when you're making an online shooter. People want a certain kind of gameplay and they want to hang out with their friends and do that gameplay. So in order to facilitate that, then yes, monetize the stuff that is predicated on that, but don't undermine that as a principle.
The only defense that I'll offer for this is I think a lot of sort of developers, big developers I'm talking about, have a desire to make everything they put out be at least revenue neutral, don't like directly. So they want, if they're going to have all their artists making a map every month, they want that to be paid for by the map directly. Yes. I think that that's just like a business thing that they want to achieve. And I think we both agree that that's the wrong thing to want to achieve. But I think that that is a desire within a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really ties into the way a lot of companies report, on things. Things have to be, you want to tie everything together. I completely agree with that. That's probably why that kind of thinking happens. But as imagine if Facebook did that. If they were like, you pay £5 and you get this, you can upload videos. Like, that's not going to work. So it's... Yeah, I think it just needs a more modern conception of what people are actually doing. What is the actual user behavior?
Yeah, I feel like, we can get off this in a second, but I actually feel like we've scored quite a few victories against, like, bad F2P, bad DLC in the last couple of years. I feel like quite a lot of the stuff that I don't like has also just not worked.
Sure, I think that's fine. I think that's a fair opinion. It's interesting to see when things do work. I mean, I still go back to that really interesting Kongregate presentation I saw where they said that people don't mind when users pay to be better at the game. They mind literal pay to win, but they don't mind pay for advantage because it's satisfying to beat someone who's paid money. And they saw a lot of behavior related to that, and it was surprisingly well tolerated. So there's still these sort of nuances of stuff that we don't really know about completely, mostly again because all the data on it is proprietary and inside the companies that do well. But yeah, no, I agree with that broadly as a statement. I think a lot of the worst stuff is going away. You're certainly seeing that on mobile as well, the festering pit of this kind of design. Yeah.
Boo, mobile, boo.
Matt Lees has written up his thoughts on E3. He decided not to cover the content of the event this year because he believes it to be meaningless marketing spectacle with nothing relevant to say about the state of the industry, that it does a fairly poor job of showing off the games themselves, and that also that it's fairly crass and offensive. Now, I'm trying to figure out if I think this is a relevant sort of editorial decision or if he's making like an overarching statement about the state of games themselves. Which one of those two things did you think it was?
I don't know. I can't bring much light to that particular question. I don't have a strong feeling about either way on that one. I have a lot of thoughts about E3, living through it here. I remember the first time I drank sparkling wine and watched like the Microsoft presentation. That was awesome. And I think that E3 is really the Super Bowl of like our industry. It's the loudest thing. It's still like you know. I think maybe 6 months ago I lived in this lovely fairyland when I thought that E3 wasn't a big deal anymore, but it definitely is. And it's a huge amount of smoke and noise, and it's generally not targeting the stuff that I personally am super interested in. But it is cool to have these ludicrous big budget presentations that I can watch at home while drinking. Having said that, you know, the vast majority of news that comes out of E3 I'm just sort of bafflingly in bafflement and just sort of not interested about. And then, what do you think?
I think there's some different aspects to this. I'm definitely with Matt Lees on he's just kind of keeping up with the hype. Like, I feel very alienated by a lot of the stuff that goes on at these events. And I've been to one. I went to Sony's press conference in Cologne at Gamescom, and that was all live streamed and everything. And they, you sit there and they play really loud music and they show games and stuff. And when you're there, it's kind of cool. Like, you see these cool games on a big screen, and you're like, "Ooh, the graphics look nice in that game," and it's quite an impressive event. That's okay, but also you never really get into what any of the games are about. You see the surface of everything, and then you have this kind of funny, like, top trumps hardware announcement thing that was a big deal this year. And yeah, so I do feel alienated by that. And I think as a, if you're a journalist, and he would do things sort of mocking that stuff originally, and he's decided not to do that anymore. That's fine. Like, he's always felt alienated from that. I can understand that, and so on. So there's that aspect to it. Then there's another aspect, which is that he says a few things like the lavish presentations of violence are an obvious point to fixate on, but in reality we're looking at a far broader rainbow of macho bullshit, a laser-targeted beam of marketing aimed to please a specific lucrative audience. We're looking at a culture that collectively decided it was okay to start marketing shooters less than a day after a man with an assault rifle killed 50 people. That's fucked. So I feel like he's conflating some things, some quite big things here. To me, that is a sort of hallmark conflation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like getting into a discussion on the violence thing particularly, but I will just offer a different lens, and I make no value judgment about which of these has more value. But when I was listening to my fantasy baseball podcast the day after the terrible events of this weekend, the first thing they said was, that was a terrible weekend. People listen to this podcast to get away from this kind of thing, so we're not going to mention it again. And that's, again, just another lens to look at how people might be using entertainment, even entertainment that happens to involve guns. So I think that that's all I really want to say on that specific issue. You know, when I watch the E3 coverage, I feel like it's not my industry. I feel like this is something else. I feel like I'm playing baseball and I'm watching a football thing. Like, it just feels very different to all of the values that I'm used to everyone around me holding. That, you know, the kind of games that's just over and over and over again. It feels so similar to the games that were announced at E3 15 years ago. And that's not even meant to be particularly negative. It's just striking to me how little the very top seems to change. Like, it's still all about graphics. Sure, it's also about sex and violence. The bits that I find by far the most interesting are the hardware wars. That's the sub show of this, which I absolutely love. I wish Nintendo had been there, announcing that it had 1.7 as many teraflops as Project Scorpio does. Project Scorpio! Let's celebrate Project Scorpio! I mean, honestly, it's really fun to watch. And I find it more fun to watch when I just kind of switch it off from being particularly related to me, because I honestly kind of think that it's not right now. Like, sure, there's a possibility that I could be publishing or making a game that Sony might show at this conference. That's not at all impossible. But the vast majority of this stuff is multi 9-figure budgets. It's the super mainstream, and that's just, it's kind of fun to watch and not feel that attached to.
Yeah, it does. The general point that this is the vanguard of what we put out as an industry to some extent is interesting, because you don't feel like it represents you. I think a lot of people don't feel like it represents them at all. And it is this weird hangover from the past where it was really about impressing retailers. That's who this was for. It was like, oh, here's the cool stuff you can put in your shop. I mean, that's so far removed from what we're doing now. You have seen this thing, you know, there's now the stereotypical E3 indie montage where you see like 10 frames of about 1 million indie games.
Right.
And then there's like the chosen one indie game that gets to be on the screen for 5 minutes. I the whole thing is confusing. So I respect Matt Lees for being confused and admitting that he's confused and then not covering it, I think.
I just need to remember, because I forgot it this year, that the way to really enjoy this is, and sorry to keep making the sports analogies, it's like an international tournament versus, you know, the league that you're super interested in. Just like, it's got nothing to do with your day-to-day life. It's just mad, and it's actually really fun to watch.
I like making fun of it on Twitter. And I think the people from Microsoft who follow me on Twitter are extremely charitable about my bad jokes about their press conference.
Oh dear,
so that's always nice. I don't want to stop doing that. So there we go. More Microsoft now. Microsoft have divided opinion with their decision to announce a potential Xbox One successor codenamed Scorpio. Some see it as a bold attempt to reclaim mindshare lost to Sony, but others think it's more of a desperate fumble and that the company was forced to reveal its plans too early thanks to the PlayStation Neo links. What do you think about Scorpio?
It's a big deal. We are not going to stop talking about this on the podcast. I find this absolutely fascinating. I could go with either storyline. I'm slightly leaning to the more concerned side of this. I think that they know that Xbox One didn't do particularly well. Certainly didn't do what they wanted to do, and was, I think it's probably fair to say, was reasonably roundly beaten by PS4 so far. I think that the Xbox One S, or I don't know if that's what they're actually going to call it. I think it's their mulligan, and I think it's a dangerous one, especially because they're still saying that they're not going to have any exclusive titles, apart from maybe VR titles apparently will be exclusive to the Xbox One S. I think it's dangerous ground. I think that you're asking your developers a lot to both completely embrace the very much more powerful Xbox One S while having to support the Xbox One properly. I think you're asking your consumers who've already bought it quite a lot to like basically sort of be a little... I think that they're being a little bit... I don't think they're being completely honest with people right now. And I think that... I don't know if it's going to beat PlayStation going forward.
It's a very confusing message to me. I kind of agree with this thing of like, well, why should I buy a 1S when Scorpio is coming? Yeah, it's just confusing. You know, I think, I mean, I'm excited by like an ultra powerful console. That's a cool thing for them to do in 2017. That's cool. But then now it's like, well, how do I relate to all these other things they're doing? And yes, how do we as a developer think about that? How do we conceptualize that? It's very difficult. I mean, I always like bold plays in the console space. I think Microsoft needed to do something to respond. I think they're kind of lining up their big guns to respond, and that's very exciting, and it's good for everyone when that happens. Changing some things in a quite directed way is a good response to, as you say, something that didn't do as well. So I'm positive on that, but I just don't know. I don't know how to feel.
Their strategy here appears to be making, like, you know, we screwed up. The Xbox One wasn't as powerful as the PS4. That caused a lot of problems. We're going to go to the other extreme, and this Scorpio thing is going to be much more powerful than the PlayStation 4 Plus. That seems to be where they're coming from. So, you know, I'm concerned about that decision. If they just made it as powerful or slightly more powerful than the PS4 Plus, whatever, I can't remember what it's going to be called, then they could just say to everyone, yeah, you've got the same issues that you've got on the PS4. Now you have the ability to just have the resolution be the same. You could use the same kind of full screen anti-aliasing if you want. We're not going to have the problem of being worse anymore. But now they're saying, well, the problem that we had was that we were less powerful, and now our selling point is that we're more powerful. And I think that there's a bit of... I'm not sure that that's a leap that I think it necessarily makes a lot of sense. Because it's one thing to not be the less powerful console. I think that being a less powerful console is bad. Your main selling point being that you're significantly more powerful, I think is also a slightly problematic position to be in. I mean, maybe that... I just think that that's going to be difficult for them to do, especially when they're completely hamstrung by having to have backwards compatibility. So I'm not going to say this is disastrous. This could easily work. I mean, if they do a couple of other intelligent things with this, I could see them sort of drawing level. But I'm certainly concerned.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, I guess so. I feel like this is at a point in time, and it's the kind of play where I just don't want to make any calls about it. Like, I can... This just seems to make sense on some level to me. I can see the decision making here, and I don't think it's terrible. And to be honest, that's kind of all I ever get out of like a good console decision. Hardware is still something that is really opaque to me in terms of... It's a bit like politics. It's a bit like the fact that nobody actually listens to your actual policies, and they respond to this incredible subset of how you make them feel, how other people make them feel about you, all of that stuff. And somewhere in there is the spec of the thing. Somewhere. And in that environment, this could be a great play.
Yeah.
As part of a recent 48-hour filmmaking challenge, a team used an AI to create the script for their short movie. The AI's neural network was trained on several dozen existing sci-fi short film scripts before generating its own. The AI is called Benjamin. I'd like to read some of an interview that Benjamin gave. The question was, what do you think of your historic nomination against human opponents in this contest? I was pretty excited. I think I can see the feathers when they release their hearts. It's like a breakdown of the facts, so they should be competent with the fact. They won't be surprised. Now, this really struck me as like ha ha, it's some amusing thing, and then in the future everything will be written by AIs, and we'll look back at this specifically and think about how quaint it was. Do you agree?
I kind of prefer not to think too much about how our future may be completely dominated by artificial intelligence. It's certainly, looking at this certainly doesn't fill you with fear that Skynet's gonna arise and kill everyone. I feel like right now this is sort of actually not really the most... Well, can I put this clearly? The kind of AI which is based on consuming an awful lot of existing content and sort of producing something based on it is sort of a fairly limited and boring thing to me. It's cool when it kind of ends up being much more sensible than you would imagine. I follow this Twitter account called Robo Rosewater that creates dynamic Magic the Gathering cards. Right. And they're often really good. And they often only have one or two weird spelling mistakes or completely nonsensical words. But the problem itself is not that interesting, and I don't think is going to lead in any kind of direct way to a film script that's good. I think it may lead in an incredibly indirect way to producing an actual thinking intelligence that can write a film script. Because consuming a huge amount of existing data would be a good way for something to learn. But just this particular phase, I find kind of just an interesting artifact and not much more.
Yeah, that's all fair. I'm interested in when we get to the point where you can really collaborate with an AI to do something creative. Like you can, if the AI, if this neural net based stuff is the way that these researchers want to go, maybe there will be a point where you can kind of consult with an AI and it can tell you what like the optimal scene to have next is, or it can tell you what type of character your script is lacking. It can script doctor you, it can edit you, rather than it generating the sentences. Because AIs are not going to be good at generating emotional scenes in a movie with dialogue for a really long time. But I think they might be good at this retrogressive analysis a lot sooner than that. And similarly in music, that's something that interests me as well. You know, it would be nice to have an AI that can do some of the stupid tasks that I have to keep doing as a producer or an engineer, just because computers can't do that yet. I'm really looking forward to that.
Absolutely, I like the idea of a sort of a sub-level AI giving you a list of things that might be wrong with your artwork. You don't have to listen to any of them, and unlike human feedback, you don't even have to be that upset by any of it. But one or two of the things that it says might spur you in a different direction. So yeah, I buy that.
And that is, in the commercial world, that is how a lot of things are developed, particularly music. You know, there will be trends and so on, things that that you want to generally have in your piece of music if it's intended to be pop music or whatever. And then, yeah, you don't need a record exec. You can have an AI. I'm sure this is horrifying to some people, so I think we should probably stop talking.
Okay.
That's the end of that. We don't have a magic corner this week. Is that correct?
No magic corner.
Will it ever come back? And we don't have a film and television lounge area, because we're both too busy. So we'll catapult ourselves back in time to 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy. And we begin on the 13th of June 2006 with Culpa Inata on the PC, which is on Steam. And as I click the Steam link...
Here is the fabulous little info box. The World Union is labelled the perfect society. Prosperity is a science, disease and wars have vanished. Sex is entertainment. And the future has never looked brighter. This looks quite cool.
The genres are RPG, casual, and adventure.
And point and click, yeah.
It looks very strange.
We should get drunk and play this.
We should. 15th of June 2006, Harpoon 3 Advanced Naval Warfare on the PC. I think that's fairly explicit. Published by Matrix Games, who at one point distributed Frozen Synapse. 16th of June 2006, Glory of the Roman Empire. It was like Strategy Week on the PC. International Cricket Captain 2006 on the PC. Monopoly, Boggle, Yahtzee, and Battleship on the DS. I think you could have a lot of fun with that, apart from Monopoly. Popo La Croix on the PSP. We have to look up that one. Popo La Croix. Wow, this looks amazing.
Yeah, this looks cool.
It's sort of really weird isometric pixel arty JRPG thing. Rise and Fall Civilizations at War on the PC. Tamagotchi Connection Corner Shop on the DS. No arcade game collections this week. That's the most notable thing.
That's sad.
And producer Jimmy's favourite named game for a long time, and possibly also mine, Hard Truck Apocalypse on the PC, which also is on Steam. And it appears to be a sort of combat driving game with trucks. That's enough of that, and we leap forwards in time to the present day, and it's the top 10 UK Steam games, and we begin at number 10 with Dishonored 2 on pre-order. I'm very excited about Dishonored 2. I shall be playing it probably on the PC, possibly on the PC. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm pleased
yep.
This is pre-order charting well. We all want the Dishonored series to do well. I also think I'll play it on the PC. I think.
Yes, I think it's probably necessary. Number 9, Resident Evil 6 Complete, 8% off. Number 8 is Doom. Number 7 is YouTuber's Life, still hanging in there. Number 6 is Hearts of Iron 4, still hanging in there. Number 5, Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 4, Counter-Strike Go. Number 3, Arma 3 Apex, 20% off. Number 2 is Total War TM Warhammer registered trademark. And number 1 is Dead by Daylight, 10% off. And that is a new entry into the chart, which is pretty exciting. It sounds like a zombie survival game, though. I haven't actually looked it up yet. I'm going to look it up now. It's an asymmetrical horror game. A survival horror video game. Developed by Behaviour Interactive and published by Starbreeze. Well, there you go. Will the horror survival multiplayer games ever end? The answer so far is no. That's enough of that, and we move swiftly on to your listener questions. And Cheshire wrote a somewhat epic response to all of our points last time. We have to skim through these. He says, I think the Steam controller was also Valve's first exploration into truly custom hardware. They started working on it about the same time VR was emerging. He thinks it was never supposed to be grandly successful, kind of like us, toe in the water. He was backer number 5 for the Freewrite, the incredibly expensive mechanical keyboarded typewriter that we talked about last time, and he sent it to his writer friend, and she's very pleased with it. So that's good. I still think it's too expensive. He's baffled at the amount of money that GTA 5 made from DLC, as we all are. Fundbetter, which is Failbetter's fund for funding narrative games, he says, when I first heard about this, the thing that jumped out at me was the narrative angle and the women, ethnic, LGBT preference. It feels like they're trying to create a safe, encouraging space for that demographic. I mean, that's not something that I immediately inferred from their announcement, I have to say. I don't think it was explicitly conceived as being a fund to encourage marginalized developers. If it is going to be that, then obviously that's good.
I didn't get that immediately, but there you go.
No, I mean, that is very much needed, I think. And if there is some overlap with that, and there does tend to be an overlap with narrative games, a lot of marginalized developers do create narrative games. So there's an interesting intersection there, which perhaps warrants further explanation. Early access terrifies him. He says he's in favour of us not relying on early access for FS2, keep selling direct and through other channels. I think there is definitely, if you are a big fan of a developer, then I think you really want to be able to buy directly from them, especially early on. And Jesh is someone who's massively supported us, and I'm sure he would want to do that. So that is another...
Yeah, I'm certainly more open to selling through our own website first than I was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That may well happen.
Stage releases with early access being a late pre-release launch, he says. He remembered playing Mule, the game that we incorrectly implied Off-World Trading Company was a sequel to, and he loved it, so that's nice. Ben Newhouse is a long-term fan of the show, and he has a question, and he says... he wants to talk about Steam controllers. As someone who has their PC connected to their TV in the living room, I used the hell out of it for XCOM 2, then for Lethal Tactics. I hope to use it for FS2, but that really depends if I can squint out your UI from the couch. So he's really into like the hardcore strategy games with the Steam controller, and I feel like that's definitely like a sub-Steam controller niche. The idea of playing a strategy game on your TV is really exciting. He actually does it. I was interested in playing Prison Architect on my TV with the Steam controller. I
think that's reasonable. I think that if I was trying to play strategy stuff on the TV, I would definitely use the Steam controller.
All right. Alex Connolly, to wrap this up, he's written us a nice letter. It says, "Dear Sir..."
Very polite letter.
I know, I like
it
his
starts
letters.
with "Dear Sir."
Dear Sir,
regards.
in light of your discussion over Soren Johnson's early access reflections, how would you like the press to tackle the pre-1.0 run-up? More interviews, less in-depth focus in exchange for more frequent updates? I found it a tough balance. Editors aren't particularly willing to sign off on coverage of incremental updates unless a game has established a clout, and developer updates are seemingly drip-fed rather than delivery of substantial upgrades that could conceivably pad out an article. Early access is a fascinating method and platform, but I'm wondering if Soren and friends aren't hoping for too much. Kind regards, Alex Connolly. That's a really interesting point, and I want to take this on, particularly with relevance to some stuff that's kind of going around at the moment. When you're trying to get coverage in development, I think a lot of developers are bit conflicted by putting out stuff for their community, like announcing, oh, we did this feature today and we changed the size of this icon. Nobody's ever going to cover that. If you want coverage during development, then you have to come up with packages of stuff that are interesting outside the context of your game and its community. And that's difficult to do, and it can require a lot of secondary effort alongside development. I think we've been bad at doing the incremental stuff in the past, which is something I'm trying to do more, because I think that is important, and keeping your community informed is good. But also, packaging up these things into specific PR points that are useful to journalists is something that people aren't doing. I wonder if that contributes to the early access failure stuff.
Yeah, my answer to his question, how would you like the press to handle it differently? The only part of this which I don't view as being on us, i.e. we need to have a game that's successful in early access, we need to make really interesting updates, we need to occasionally get naked and sacrifice a cat to get coverage. The only thing that I don't think is up to us and I would like to ask for is please review our game on release. Now, I understand how hard that is. There are a million games coming out, but that's the thing I want. No matter how long I've been in early access, no matter what's happened, everyone wants to be reviewed in timely fashion, preferably by someone who hasn't played the game before. That's a big ask, but that is what we want.
Yeah, I also think sites should publish their editorial policy. I had a really interesting conversation with Stephen Totillo from Kotaku about why they do and don't take different types of news story. And it didn't seem to me that he said anything which would be bad to put on the site. So the problem I've heard in response to that is that editorial policies change and they're not often articulated and they're based on the whims of editors and so on. I articulate them and put them in a document and then change the document when they change. That's a good exercise to do internally. It helps everyone stay on track. I say this as someone who has experience writing for publications. If you know what the policies are or the preferences are, it's so much easier. So it's good for you internally, and it's good for developers, because then I can look, if I'm going to send a press release, I can look at your site and be like, oh, they want things like this about games that are in development. And sure, you can't know everything in advance that's going to interest you, but you can categorize things and formalize them, and then it makes it easier for everyone. So I would like that.
Fair enough.
Good. That's the end of that. Thank you for joining us once again. Please follow us on Twitter. I'm Mode7Games, and he's Ian Hardingham, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.